You're listening to
Path of the Jedi.
with your host, Ronnie Cruz.
All right, welcome to Path of the Jedi, the podcast where Star Wars meets personal development. My name is Ronnie Cruz, your host for this delayed adventure. That's right, delayed adventure. I want to kick off this episode by thanking you for continuing to give me grace as I get back into the groove of recording the show every week. This is the second episode of the year, and as you can tell, I'm not quite back I'm not quite back into the habit of recording every week. I usually record these on Tuesdays, but given my crazy workload right now with all the new projects I'm doing, it's just the day-to-day challenge is that the calendar and the schedule can change at the drop of a dime. And so I wasn't able to get to this particular show yesterday. So it's recording. I'm recording on Wednesday, and it's going to be a same day release. So, anyways, the point is, I appreciate your grace. I appreciate your understanding and your patience as I readjust and get back into the habit of doing recording these every week. As I mentioned last week, I may have to shift the day it's released, but you know, whatever I decide in that regard in terms of our weekly calendar, our weekly schedule for the show, I will definitely bring you one episode a week, like I had originally set out when I started this podcast. So again, thank you so much for your grace. Thank you so much for your patience. Now, speaking of starting this podcast back in September 2021. Can you believe that? It's 2023 now. I started this in 2021. And it's been amazing. It's been amazing. I love doing this show. I love doing podcasts. So I bring that up because one of the first episodes that I recorded was around this topic, right? Was around this theme. Focus determines your reality. The quote from Qui-Gon Jinn, the great and mighty Qui-Gon Jinn, from episode 1, as he was talking to the young Anakin Skywalker on the landing pad. He says, remember, Anakin, your focus determines your reality. To help Anakin allay is, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but to help him kind of calm his worry, calm his fear, right? Because his fear, it will determine his outcome. It will determine his reality. This is an important quote, and there's a reason. Well, it's important, and that's why I'm revisiting it, right? After a little bit over a year. I think about it all the time because as a coach and mentor, that's part of what, outside of this show, it's part of what I do. This is something I always have to point out to people, right? Okay, what are you focusing on in the moment? What is the story that's going on in your head? What's the narrative that's going on in your mind, right? Like the voices in your head, or the voice. Hopefully it's only one voice, and that's your own. If there's more than one voice in your head, then I encourage you to seek out professional help beyond this show. But generally, we all have a narrative. We all have a story that's going on at all times in our minds, and our reality is largely determined by what that story is. And of course, what that story is determined by what we're focusing on. Really, really important, right? Because our perception, that narrative, how we perceive the world around us and the experiences that we have within that world, determines the quality of our experience, determines the quality of our existence while we're here on this earth. Now, in the original episode where I talked about this back in 2021, I honed in on a thing called the reticular activating system, the RAS filter, as it's known. And so just to kind of in layman's terms, this RAS filter is the design. It's a part of our mind, it's part of our brain that's designed to filter information. Because we have so much stimuli, we have so much data coming in through all our senses at once, we wouldn't be able to function, right? It would be overload if we had to process all that information at once. So the RAS filter is in charge of filtering out information that's only pertinent to us, right? It's only pertinent to what we want to think about and what we want to focus on. And so we can actively and purposefully focus on specific things so that our RAS filter knows what we want to focus on. It's the old, you guys have probably heard this, if you start thinking about, let's say, a blue Volkswagen Bug, you'll start seeing blue Volkswagen Bugs everywhere. Okay, so that's not a really good example. A good example is, before you bought the car that you drove, right, and you were thinking about, okay, I want this specific car. The days, maybe even weeks leading up to you actually purchasing the car that you have now, if you have a car, the car that you have now, you started seeing that specific car, maybe even the specific color that you want of that car everywhere around town, right? That's your RAS filter at work, because again, you want the car, you want this specific make and model, even color of the car. You start seeing it in your environment, in your day-to-day life, because your RAS filter it has been given the instruction that that's what you want to focus on. And then therefore, right, your focus then determines your reality. You see more of it. Now, the mechanism, the conversation that a lot of people have about the RAS filters is that, well, there's two things, right? There's two ways that you can interpret how the RAS filter works. The first interpretation is that those cars were always there, right? They were always there. In the objective reality, in the physical realm, those cars always existed. And you may have walked by them every day, you may have driven by them every day, and you just didn't notice that they were there because your RAS filter wasn't given the instructions to pay attention to them. Therefore, you largely ignored them, and they weren't a part of your subjective reality, right? Because they weren't something that you were focused on, they weren't part of your reality. The second interpretation goes into the quantum world a little bit, and physics and math and all that good stuff, which I have to preface this, and I've always, I think I said this in the original episode, I'm not a physicist, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not even a scientist of any sort. I'm just a dude that records a podcast that happens to have had an interest in things that have led me to reading up a little bit on some of this stuff. My understanding of quantum mechanics and quantum physics and the quantum realm is very remedial at best, but it allows me to understand this principle: your focus determines your reality from a different sense. In that, the quantum realm is just a field of possibilities. The experiments that have been done on trying to observe electrons is that scientists, I think, for the most part, have concluded that electrons they exist as possibilities. And not in like one fixed spot, right? Like that you can follow in its orbit around the nuclei of the atom. They're possibilities, energetic possibilities, and they don't collapse into reality, into physical reality, until observed upon. Until the awareness of the outside observer is brought to its attention, or the other way around. But you know what I mean. The electron isn't observable until it's observed, right? So the awareness of the observer is what collapses the quantum realm into objective reality. So it's kind of the other way around, right? With the first example, the first interpretation, it's objective reality, and then objective reality, and then our subjective reality that interprets that. And in the second example, it's subjective reality that determines objective reality, that collapses the quantum realm into physical matter. Whatever you decide to subscribe to, I think both examples work when it comes to what we're talking about today, when it comes to your focus determining your reality, right? Because in either example, it determines what your specific experience is of life, and so I really want to bring your awareness to that. I think it's tough, especially in a world where we're constantly plugged in, and where we have access to the internet and distractions. We have more distraction now, I think, than any generation in human history, and so our focus is largely as distracted, and it's already, I think, difficult to rein your focus in, and well, to even just let people know that your focus determines in your reality, and that you can actually be purposeful and intentional with that focus. And then add to that the fact that, again, we are the most distracted generation because of our technology and the sheer amount of data and information that we have access to. So it just makes it that much more, it's just one more hurdle that we have to tackle to being really, really purposeful and intentional about our focus, because again, our focus determines your reality. That's why this is so important. Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, can we be intentional with that, right? Like, like, it's not one of those things where I can just think about and focus on an ice cream cone, or an order of large fries from McDonald's, and then that just materializes into reality. Yes and no, maybe. But if I drop that in your head, in your ear enough times during this episode, something is going to drive you. You're going to start to focus on it, consciously or unconsciously, and that focus will eventually lead you to taking the actions to going to your nearest neighborhood McDonald's. Sorry, this is not a McDonald's endorsement, by the way. I encourage you actually to stay away from McDonald's because it's so bad for you. However, my point is that I can drop that in your ear enough times so that your brain will focus on it, and you'll then later on in the afternoon or whenever you're listening to this, go out and go through the drive-thru and get yourself an order of fries, right? They're delicious. How can you not? So it's not so much like in the magical quote unquote sense that you're collapsing the quantum realm into all of a sudden having an order of large hot fries in your hands at that moment, but the causality of it, the causality of it being in planted in your mind, the idea, then that's what you focus on, and then you create that reality. The thing is this. Just even in that example, you can see how that our focuses can shift and can be changed and can be influenced, right? Again, with the access that we have to the internet and all that data, our focus is influenced by so many things. Before that, it was already influenced by so many things, right? It's influenced by the people we spend time with, our peer groups. They always say, you're the sum total of the 5 people you hang out with the most. What's the other saying? There's something that I used to hear a lot when I was a kid. You sleep with dogs, you get fleas, or something like that. Birds of a feather flock together. Yeah, all those kinds of things, right? They speak to the fact that you are very much influenced by the people you spend the most time with. And that doesn't have to be friends. Of course, your family groups, the communities that you engage in the most. You generally will be influenced by the predominant ideas within those specific groups and communities. And so if you're not aware of this, your focus will then be determined by default, right? It will be influenced by all these outside factors, and so you'll just kind of be going through life experiencing a reality that's influenced by all these other things, and not purposefully. It's not your experience and your reality is not something that you're purposefully and intentionally creating. You can have influence on your own focus, right? If all those external things can influence your focus, then you can influence your focus as well. You can actually, again, you can decide, you can choose what to focus on at any given moment about any specific thing that you're experiencing or witnessing or observing, right? And the conversation that usually is had with this is whether you're a cup half empty or a cup half full type of individual. It's the same cup. It's the same amount of volume in the cup. It's just how you look at that cup and the story that you tell yourself. Again, that narrative, that voice that's in our minds, and that will determine your focus. The first place to start is raising your awareness about this and about the thought patterns and about your ability to actually choose your thought patterns, and then that leads to being able to be more purposeful and intentional with our focus, and that then determines that then allows us to be more intentional and purposeful with our reality, our subjective experience with life, right? Right? Really, really heady stuff, maybe. I don't know. It's just how I think about things. It's just how I focus on it, right? Right? Because, yes, I recognize that there are some objective realities that are out of our control. Anything external is out of our control, right? We can't, life sometimes just happens. However, how we choose to interpret that life, how we choose the narrative that we tell ourselves about the experiences that we have, the external experiences that we have, will determine our internal experience, right? Our subjective reality. And this is what I'm trying to get at, is that we have control, right? We have control. To reference another pop culture movie, the Matrix, the kid in the Matrix, in the first Matrix, they were like in this monastery, right? It's like a school, but it's like a monastery. The kid that talks to Neo when he walks in, the kid says there is no spoon, right? And so to me, like, that's the kid is saying is that, well, whether there's a spoon or not, it's just a construct of your focus. It's a construct of your RAS filter, and whether it's there or not, whether it's objective reality to subjective reality or the other way around, it's your focus. It's your focus that determines it, right? There is no spoon. It's just, it depends on what you're looking at and how you interpret that particular piece of metal that the kid is holding. Yeah, I don't know if I'm doing a great job of explaining this, but it's so important. It's so important. Okay, so here's another example. With the glass half empty, glass half full, right? It's the same objective reality interpreted in different ways, and that determines the outlook of the individuals that have the specific philosophies or mindsets, right? It doesn't seem like it's intentional. It doesn't seem like it's purposeful. It's just, again, well, yeah, that's how I see it. It's a cup half empty. If that's how you see it, that's going to be your experience in life. But you can choose to see it as half full, right? It's not a set definition, right? The example that I was getting to is, let's say you're in New York City, right? And you're standing on a street corner, and there's 5 other people on that street corner, and you see a car accident. You see a little fender bender. Now, your perception, your observation of that fender bender, and therefore your subjective reality is going to be different than everybody else that's standing in that corner, because we all have our unique perspective, right? We all have our unique take on the world, and so that car accident, that fender bender happening, has an objective, definitive reality. But to all those individuals, including you standing on that street corner, it was a different experience, right? It was a different experience, and it was determined largely. It depends on each individual's perception of it, right? So reality is perception, reality is focus, and if objective reality can be experienced in infinite different ways depending on the observer, then yeah, meaning isn't fixed. Meaning isn't fixed. Just like with the cup half empty or the cup half full, it's not fixed, right? Like meaning and definition is all interpretive. And if it's interpretive, it can then be controlled. You can focus on and choose an interpretation of reality, and as opposed to allowing that interpretation or your interpretation be influenced by outside forces, right? Right? Really big stuff. Really big stuff. Qui-Gon was onto something. They like in that scene, Qui-Gon and Anakin and Obi-Wan, everybody that was involved in those events, that in that small circle, they were experiencing largely the same objective events, the same objective realities, with the escalating tensions on Naboo, with potential for war breaking out, all this uncertainty. All three of these characters, again, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin, were going through these things, but their experience of them, of those events, were completely different. I mean, obviously with Qui-Gon, he was super calm and collected. He was very much in the moment, always talking about being mindful and being aware, right? So that way he actually intentionally and purposely always engages in controlling what his focus is. And that was really one of the first lessons for Anakin, because his focus was everywhere. His focus was on all the uncertainty, which naturally, I mean, he's a child, right? He's a child. Unfortunately, he was never able to really outgrow that. But that's a different conversation for a different episode. But you see just in that scene how all of the objective reality is the same. It's unified, but each individual subjective experience and subjective reality of the characters was different, and so that's the interpretation of it, right? Your reality is determined by your focus, and you can choose because it's unified, right? You can choose how you focus on that reality. Right? Do you choose to either be Qui-Gon or to be Anakin in any situation? And I guess that's a great tool to use, right? Like I just came up with a nice tool. Especially you're experiencing something particularly challenging or difficult, that always reverts us back to old patterns and protective mechanisms. If in the moment, if you can, ask the question, raise the question in your mind: do I want to be Qui-Gon Jinn in the situation, or do I want to be young Anakin pre-Jedi Academy, right? And so that can shift us back into remembering that we have a choice in how we think about and how we process specific experiences, and therefore that we have a choice in what we focus on, and that determines our reality. Yeah, big stuff. So whether or not you believe in the quantum realm and collapsing the quantum field into physical reality, or you believe that objective reality exists and it's our interpretation, whichever way, both of those things, both of the equations work for us being in the driver's seat of controlling our focus. And to have this conversation repeatedly, and that's why really I wanted to bring it up again, because it's come up a lot in the last 12 months. In the coaching that I've done, remember, focus, determine your focus, choose your focus, because that's going to determine your experience, i.e. your subjective reality, right? To continue to raise your awareness to these mechanisms, to the RAS filter, to your ability to choose, it's to allow you to be more intentional and to be more purposeful, right? Like the more aware you are of a thing, the more ability you'll have to controlling it and being intentional with it, right? So that's the conversation. It's pretty big. It's pretty heady. I mean, I don't mean to be. Just like listening to myself record this episode and record topics like this, it makes me feel like, man, I hope I'm not just completely unintelligible or difficult to understand, because this is an important topic. It's an important topic to allowing you to not only have a better experience of life, but create a better experience of life, so you can take that to the next level and use these facilities, the RAS filter and our ability to control our focus, in a reactionary or in a response to events. You can now actually tailor your focus so that you can create outcomes for yourself in the future. Just like with the French fries example, I keep dropping French fries, McDonald's French fries in your ear. It's not a reactionary. It can create an outcome down the road, determined by what you're focused on, right? I didn't even get into that part yet. Actually, that's probably the more important part of the conversation. Beyond being reactionary and using your focus to have healthier response to difficult situations, you can create realities that will be and can be determined by your intentional focus, right? And this goes more towards like vision setting and goal setting and creating new outcomes in your life, especially given that it's still a little bit, new year. I know it's February now, but if you have new goals for this new year, generally it's resolution time, right? So as long as you're focused on those goals and making those things happen, and how much you love and you want those things to come to fruition in your life, your focus on those things is the first step to creating that reality in your life, right? Like I always set new goals, and not just at New Year's. I always kind of have a next thing in the pipeline. As if you've been listening to the show for any given amount of time, you'll know that about me, and so that focus determines my future reality. Not just your current reality and experience, but your future reality as well. Yeah, good stuff, good stuff. And, we have Qui-Gon Jinn to thank for these lessons. Okay, so that's going to do it for today's episode. I appreciate y'all's time. Not a lot of bells and whistles for today because I am, trying to get this out there. Oh, one thing. For those of you who are Star Wars podcasters, I want to try a new thing. I know there's a Star Wars podcasting day that's about to come up, and I'm going to try to participate in that. However, I want to start a new thing where I think I'm gonna call it the Shout Out Network. You guys know I love shout outs, right? I do a shout out every episode. And so for this episode, I want to give a shout out to all the Star Wars podcasters out there because they just make life better. More Star Wars and conversations about Star Wars, healthy conversations about Star Wars. It's always fun, and it enriches the experience of being a Star Wars fan. So shout out to all the Star Wars creators out there, especially in the podcasting space. I want to create a shout out network for Star Wars podcasts, right? So if you're a podcaster out there, a Star Wars podcaster out there listening to this, shoot me a DM at our Twitter. It's at POTJ Podcast, and let me know that if you want to participate in this in this shout out network. And what I mean is this. The Star Wars Podcasting Day celebration is great, and I think it's really awesome that so many people participate in that. It's a great way to learn about other Star Wars podcasts out there. However, my idea with the Shout Out Network is to give a shout out to individual podcasts that you want to give a shout out to, right? You'll potentially then be exposing my audience. Let's just say, for example, exposing you all to a podcast, another Star Wars podcast that I appreciate and love. And so for podcasters to participate in this, you don't have to give a shout out to everyone that's part of that shout out network. However, it allows you, number one, to find more Star Wars podcasts that you can potentially be listening to and enjoy, and that allows the producers and the host of that podcast then when you share it to your show, it exposes them to newer audiences. So anyways, it's in concept form. I'm still conceptualizing this. In the business world, we call it ideation. I hate that word. I hate that frickin' word, ideation. Stop it. Anyway, sorry. I'm not usually super opinionated, but really, did you need to create that word, ideation? It's just the idea phase. Anyways, I'm in idea phase right now for the Shout Out Network. So if you're a Star Wars podcaster and you're interested in learning more about this idea, hit me up on the DMs in Twitter. Again, it's POTJ Podcast, and we could talk more. We can talk more about being part of the Shout Out Network. But yeah, again, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. Shout out goes to all my fellow Star Wars podcasters out there. I'm not sure when, there's lots to be excited about with, with Star Wars. We've got, I'm not going to be able to make it this year to Celebration. It's in London. I don't think I'm going to be able to go. But with all the other Star Wars out there, I'm catching up on Bad Batch second season. I love the Bad Batch. I finished Tales of the Jedi. get out of here. I wish they were longer, and I wish there was more, but it's so good. And of course, you know, the big talk is Mandalorian season 3. That's coming up very, very soon. So lots of Star Wars to talk about, and lots of Star Wars to digest and examine, and to interpret and to share with you here on the show. So tune in next week for more Path of the Jedi, more lessons, more ridiculousness from your host, from yours truly. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You know how to reach out to me if there's anything that you'd like to discuss further. Otherwise, we'll catch you next week with a fresh new episode. So until then, be well, be safe, and may the Force be with you.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company nor Lucasfilm Limited, and is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names and sounds and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is intellectual property of Path of the Jedi unless otherwise indicated.